So I'm going to tackle a couple of things tonight. I started off last week talking a little bit about Buddha's Enlightenment Day, which was a couple of days away from last Wednesday. So, in many temples and Zen centers around the world, especially in the Japanese Soto tradition, but I think also in the Rinzai tradition, traditionally you have a long retreat around Buddha's Enlightenment Day. And on one or two of them that I have done in the past, you tend to stay up all night, um, the night before Buddha's enlightenment morning. Actually, I think it's often another Buddha. The story goes Buddha saw the morning star. So that would imply, of course, that he had his enlightenment experience in the early morning hours. And it's often used in the Zen tradition as a time and space to really focus our practice, to remember to take seriously, if you will, our formal practice and the effort that it takes. The Buddha sat silently under a tree for a long time. He went through all sorts of ascetic practices. He put himself, at least the story goes this way, he put himself through most anything he could think of to find a way to get some relief from the suffering of existence. Um, so, in many ways, we use Buddha's Enlightenment Day as a reminder that, in essence, the world isn't the way we think it is. That our conceptual framework shapes and colors our of the world. And over history and even in our present day, many have before us, and many of us still do put deep, intense effort and energy into a practice that points towards awakening. Awakening from what? Or awakening to what? Probably as I ask this question, most everybody has some idea. But our teaching is very clear. The idea is not it. And in fact, the awakening has something to do with breaking free from the box and the prison of our own conceptual framework. The Buddha, at least again, according to the story, left a very rich, wealthy, um, pampering existence to go into the unknown. And maybe that unknown is the prerequisite of Zen practice. Moving from what we think we know and think makes us comfortable towards what we don't know and what is actually more open, alive, and free. We practice Zen, we say, pointing towards liberation. And we think, okay, liberation from what? And in our conventional world, it's liberation from the chains that others put on us. In that viewpoint, we're the victim. And if we could just get rid of these chains, then we'll find freedom. But actually, Buddhist liberation is not freedom from the other. It's actually freedom from self, freedom from the concept of I that binds us and puts us into a box. I saw a posting. I'm on a Zen teachers listserv, and there's an organization that I'm part of called the American Zen Teachers Association. And someone wrote in, I think today, hold on one half a second while I mute somebody. Okay. somebody wrote in today and talked about reading a book, a very scholarly and difficult book, talking about the many different stories of the Buddha. We tend to think there's this man, he had this experience, and he got enlightenment. And we think we know who he was. What this book seemed to point it out was that there were multiple stories of the Buddha. And in fact, I remember watching a documentary on the Buddha many years ago where it was said that in Asia, basically people had the sense that Buddha was a mythological figure, that Buddha actually never existed at all. And then it was the Western science of the British as they colonized India. They went using their, I guess it's archaeological knowledge, searching for the actual story of the Buddha. And it was the British, or some British archaeologists anyway, who came up with the sense that Buddha was actually a live, breathing human being. And I know that when I was in India and we traveled the path of the Buddha, we went to places where now it is actually believed that the Buddha stepped. Sometimes the tours that are given are called following the steps of the Buddha. But which Buddha? Who is the Buddha? You know, each one of us has some story about the Buddha. And maybe the enlightenment is about being liberated from our own story. Because the stories that we project onto the Buddha are quite telling of the self we project onto ourselves. So when you look at your own personal concept of the Buddha, you're actually looking at the contours of your own prison. Often with the Buddha, since he's I would say, a positive creation, we think we put all the things we think we should be and we give them to the Buddha. And then we think that's what I should become. But that's a mirror image of your own insecurities, your own sense of failure, your own disappointments. So if I believe I should be omniscient, but I recognize I'm not, then my image of the Buddha will be an omniscient being. So be careful of the prison that you put Buddha in. Zen means wake up. Buddha means wake up out of the dream that you create as an overlay on existence. Which leads us to the question, what is existence and what is freedom? Before I jump too much into that, I just want to read a poem or two from our Kangon book, The Whole World's a Single Flower, that speak to either enlightenment or discussing Buddha's Enlightenment Day. So I'll just read a couple. I've got one picked out here, and then I'll just look for one more. Okay, so this is the Enlightenment poem by Zen Master Han Am. Making rice over the fire, a great awakening. The Lord of ancient Buddhas appears very clearly. If somebody asks me why Bodhidharma came to China, under the rocks, flowing water sound is never wet. Making rice over the fire, a great awakening. The Lord of ancient Buddhas appears very clearly. If somebody asked me why Bodhidharma came to China, under the rocks, flowing water sound is never wet. So the first line already gives us Zen Master Han Am's great awakening. Making rice over a fire, a great awakening. We often ask, what did Hanam attain? He had this great enlightenment. So he says, what did he attain? Could you imagine that the conceptual framework falls away and Haman completely is in the present moment making rice over a fire? Or without any concept, without any idea, listening to the words of a Dharma talk, a great awakening. Not that the words are so special, but that the awakening of what we make out of the words. Remember, freedom from what? And then his last line says, under the rocks, flowing water sound is never wet. That's a beautiful line for this koan. What does that mean? Under the rocks, flowing water sound is never wet. We can hear that as some mystical line that expresses the true meaning of awakening. But then we're back lost in the dream. We can really take that line very concretely. Under the rocks, flowing water sound is never wet. Then if you take it concretely, it's not a mystical experience. It's actually just reality of this moment. Can we be with what is without shaping it in some fashion to suit our likes and dislikes? One more. I'll give a few pages earlier is Zen Master Soeng San's enlightenment poem. So listen to the poem in some sense in the same context of Hanam's enlightenment poem. The road at the bottom of One Gaksan mountain is not the present road. The man climbing with his backpack is not a man of the past. Tuck, tuck. His footsteps transfix present and past. Crows out of a tree, caw, caw, caw. Not very mystical at all. The road at the bottom of One Gaksan mountain is not the present road. Soeng San's at the top of the mountain. The road at the bottom of the mountain is not the present road. His memory of that road is in the past. What is the road now? The man climbing with his backpack is not a man of the past. The man who left the road at the bottom of the mountain is not the same man who's climbing the mountain. Tuck, tuck. His footsteps transfix present and past. I'm not sure what the word transfix means, but as I hear it, it stops everything. The footsteps are not past, are not present, just tuck, tuck, tuck. So very simple and so very alive, not conceptual. Crows out of a tree. We all know what that is. Imagine. You've seen it 100 times, if not 1,000. Crows flying out of a tree. Caw, caw, caw. What more do we want? What legs do we paint on that snake? The crows don't need anything else. Caw, caw, caw is enough. But be honest with yourself. Know your own mind. How much more do you add? Just this. Sky is blue. The trees are green. Somebody's hungry. Give them food. Somebody is thirsty. Give them water. Simple, simple, simple. Can we find our way back to simplicity? Can we find our way back to this very moment? Can you listen from this very moment? When a request is made, can you listen and respond from this very moment? Nothing about what I'm talking about is about some amazing mystical experience where our hands turn into spiders. Just this. We like the excitement of hands turning into spiders. That's mystical. That's exciting. We don't like the simple talk of our footsteps. Embedded in Zen Master Bon Soeng's poem is a sense of impermanence. The road at the bottom of the mountain is not the present road. The road at the bottom of the mountain is the road I remember from long ago. The road at the bottom of the mountain, you have to be on the road to know the road. Off the road, you're dreaming about the road. The man carrying his backpack is not the past man. The man who left the bottom of the road doesn't exist anymore. Zen Master Bon Soeng has been dead for 19 years. Those of us who knew him and practiced with him are carrying him around as an inspiration, as some kind of font of wisdom. But it's not Zen Master Bon Soeng. The Zen Master Bon Soeng who died 19 years ago. It's about 19 years and 2 weeks. That man was not the man who came to Providence, Rhode Island in 1972. We think he's the same man. We call him by the same name, but he's not the same man. Each one of us is not even the same person we were at 7 o'clock when practice began. Basic tenet in Buddhism is impermanence. Everything appears and disappears. Last week, we talked a little bit about the Taoist view of existence, forms arising out of absence and becoming presence, and returning to absence and becoming presence. That's the story of impermanence. Last night, I was having an interview with someone. Actually, since I told Christine I was going to talk about this, I could say it was a question from Christine. And she wanted to talk about emptiness. And I think she found it this way, but I found it a fascinating conversation. And I'd have to say emptiness is probably my least favorite English Buddhist word, because I don't think the translation, using the word emptiness, actually expresses the word in English what it's trying to say. I know about myself, and maybe others don't have this experience. When I hear the word emptiness, I think of a void. Nothing's there. It's empty of everything. And actually, the name of our Zen Center is Empty Gate Zen Center. And empty, there's a couple of different, and there's maybe more than two, but I know of two ways in Chinese that you express the word emptiness. One is gong, G-O-N-G in English transliteration, which is actually the name Zen Master Sung first gave us. Gong Mun, empty gate. Mun means gate. Actually, when I did a little research on the word gong, it's more empty as if it's a glass that has nothing in it, versus the word mu, which is without. Mu is a little bit closer to what we think of as emptiness. Thich Nhat Hanh speaks about it as interbeing. And I think that's getting us a little bit closer. Because as I understand it, and I apologize if I'm leading you a little bit astray here, I'm giving you my practice experience more than a scholarly discussion of emptiness. I'm not a Buddhist scholar. I don't do a lot of scholarly research on these things. But emptiness, as far as I understand it, is empty of a permanent self. Empty really means impermanent. It comes and goes. I went to the Compass of Zen and I looked up what Zen Master Bon Soeng said about emptiness. First, I was surprised he didn't have a chapter on emptiness. But when I looked on what he wrote about the heart, from what he wrote or spoke about the Heart Sutra, he talked about emptiness. And he gave this example. He said, you can see that I'm sitting on this wooden chair. And this wooden chair seems very solid and very strong. And we believe this wooden chair exists. But if we light a fire and come back later, the chair will be gone. So the chair itself is impermanent. And as I'm saying this, I would take it one step further. There is no such thing as a chair. A chair is made by mind. On one level, we can simply say a chair is the name that we give to something. It's not the thing itself. So a chair is not a chair. The word chair is a name we give to something. So already you have to separate the thing from the name. And now we're right in Zen practice. We so often, really almost always, get lost in name and form. We believe in permanence. We want things to be permanent. Both Zen Master Sung, and then I went and looked at Suzuki Roshi, what he said about emptiness. And he basically said, and I'm paraphrasing him, that emptiness is impermanence. And when Buddha said we suffer because of desire, what Buddha really meant was that we suffer because we have a desire to make things permanent. Impermanence freaks us out. How well do you handle the fact that you're going to die? How well do you handle the fact that the thing you love the most and cherish the most will disappear? How much do we bolster these things with our fantasies, with our desire, with shaping the world to make sure that it doesn't disappear? This isn't theoretical. Look at your own life. What if you accept death? What if you accept coming and going? the first poem we use in an interview. When you come in for your first interview, we call it the human root. It says, life is like a floating cloud which appears. Death is like a floating cloud which disappears. How much do we do to prevent that from happening? In actuality, there's not one birth and one death of our existence. Well, you could say our life is a continuous birth and death. In Zen Master Bon Soeng's poem, he said, the man with the backpack climbing this mountain is not the man of the past. Can we let go of our concept of self of the past and allow ourselves to be that which we are right now? I've been talking a lot over the last few months about this sense that our minds and our desire really tend to make things into objects when actually it's process. So the man at the bottom of the mountain is not the man at the top of the mountain. The man at the bottom of the mountain is already dead and gone. Who is the man on the top of the mountain? So that even applies that there's no one awakening that finishes the job. Many of us have these moments of awakening, and they're really very important in our practice. I know for myself, and I know what I hear from others as we practice, there's often this opening to the fact that nothing really is separate in this world, that everything is interconnected with everything else, that I make I and you, but actually, I don't know where I end and you begin. And in many ways, you are just a creation of the idea that I have of something. And if I can cut through that idea, then we can actually meet, because you and I are one. In this sense of arising from absence and presence arising from absence and returning to present. I'm sorry, it's very hard to say these words. Presence arising out of absence and returning to absence. And all of that together is called the Tao. So absence and presence are fundamentally no different. There's so many different metaphors we can use for this. Boy, I'm getting balloons from somebody. There's so many metaphors, and I imagine some of you have your own metaphors, and maybe it'll be interesting to hear some of them if we have time. But one that sticks with me, and perhaps I'll end here, perhaps I'll go a little further, we'll see. But you've heard me say this a few times, and many of you have. I'm going to stop saying that because there's a lot of repetition in teaching. But if you think back to your high school chemistry class, you learn about the periodic table of elements. When we think of elements, there's oxygen, there's hydrogen, there's lead, there's plutonium. I mean, there's, I don't know, 200 of them that make up the form and basis of our existence. If you look at it closely, what you see is all those elements on the periodic table are made up of the same substance. Back when I was in high school, it was a little simpler. It was protons, neutrons, and electrons. That's been 50 years or so, a little bit more, so that actually now they're moving farther and farther down into the subatomic particles. But everything is made up of the same thing. Only the number of them are different. Oxygen has 8, hydrogen has 2. Hydrogen and oxygen come together in a particular way, and we get water. Water is just hydrogen and oxygen. Everything is interconnected. Everything is the same thing. If I understand my quantum physics enough, and I really don't, I really, really don't. But I've been explained by somebody at the Zen Center who's working on quantum computing that they have to use these very cold refrigeration to get these things down to almost absolute zero. And at that point, what they're using is both a wave and a particle. And it moves back and forth. And in that moment, there's infinite possibilities. Well, my science is quite incomplete, but it reminded me that light can be both a wave and or a particle, which means light can be both energy, either energy or matter. It's both and with light. It's not either or. And I'm sorry to take this one more step, but fundamentally, we are nothing other than light. It's light that gives us energy. It's light that gives the opportunity for matter to appear. We are absolutely nothing other than light, which means simultaneously we are energy, we are emptiness, and we are form. Suzuki Roshi uses the phrase two sides of the same coin, both and rather than either or. And if you want to follow the Buddha's way to enlightenment, you have to live a both and life. Opposites mind splits everything apart. Both and mind brings everything together. What is it right now? Listen closely and watch your step.